In December 2010, a group of 5 friends, Mark, Linda, Chris, Jenna, and Tom, planned a road trip to a ski lodge nestled in the Rockies. They were excited for a weekend of snowboarding and bonding, but they underestimated the incoming storm that the radio kept warning about. Halfway through their drive, the snowstorm intensified and visibility dropped to near zero. When their GPS malfunctioned, Tom, the driver, decided to take an unmarked side road, hoping to avoid the worst of the storm. As they ventured deeper, the trees grew denser, and the road narrowed until it finally disappeared under the snow. Their car got stuck. With no cell service and the temperature dropping rapidly, they decided to stay in the vehicle overnight. The next morning, they found an old abandoned cabin not far from where they were stranded. Desperate for shelter, they moved inside, hoping to wait out the storm. The cabin was eerily pristine, as though it had been preserved in time. Inside, they found faded photos of a family, a stern-looking man, a woman with vacant eyes, and 3 children. Linda noticed something odd about the photos. The father seemed to be glaring directly at the camera in every single picture, no matter the angle. That night, they heard noises, faint footsteps crunching in the snow outside, circling the cabin. At first, they thought it was animals, but the sounds grew deliberate, almost rhythmic. Mark peeked out the window and saw nothing but swirling snow. The second night, Jenna discovered a journal in a drawer. It belonged to the cabin's original owner, a man named Harold Green, who wrote about being snowed in during the winter of 1946. The entries grew increasingly erratic, detailing his descent into madness and paranoia. The final entry read, "They watch from the storm. They wait for you to freeze." By the third night, they began to see figures standing in the snow, vague, human-like shapes that dissolved when approached. Panic set in when Chris vanished after stepping outside to gather firewood. They found his footprints leading away from the cabin, only to stop abruptly in the middle of the clearing. By morning, only Mark and Linda were left. They decided to make a desperate attempt to walk back to the main road. As they trudged through the snow, Linda suddenly screamed. One of the shadowy figures was following them, getting closer with every gust of wind. Mark was found 3 days later by a rescue team, frostbitten and delirious. He claimed Linda had been pulled away by the storm, her screams swallowed by the wind. When the rescue team returned to the cabin, it was gone. Only an empty clearing remained, with a single, cracked photograph buried in the snow. Harold Green's family, now joined by 5 new faces. In February 2015, Sarah, a truck driver with a decade of experience, took a job hauling goods across Canada's notorious ice road. The route stretched across frozen lakes and remote tundras, connecting isolated communities to vital supplies during the harsh winter months. Sarah was confident. She had driven icy highways before, but this particular road was different. Locals called it the Lost Mile, a stretch infamous for accidents and disappearances. The warnings didn't faze her. She was determined to complete her delivery and collect the hefty paycheck. The journey started smoothly, but as she approached the Lost Mile, her radio began to crackle with static. She noticed a peculiar fog rolling in, unnatural and dense. Her GPS lost signal, and soon she was driving blind. The road became eerily quiet. Sarah slowed her rig to a crawl, her headlights barely piercing the fog. Suddenly, she spotted a figure standing in the middle of the road, a man wearing a thick parka, waving for help. She stopped and rolled down her window slightly. The man claimed his snowmobile had broken down and asked for a ride to the nearest outpost. Against her better judgment, Sarah let him in. As they drove, he remained quiet, except to occasionally mumble directions. Something about him felt off. His face was pale, almost blue, and his eyes never seemed to meet hers. After an hour, Sarah realized they were circling back to the same landmarks. The man insisted they were close, but Sarah's instincts screamed otherwise. She decided to stop and confront him. When she turned to speak, the passenger seat was empty, and the door was locked from the inside. Panic set in as the truck engine stalled. The fog thickened, and Sarah heard faint knocking on the cab's windows. She ignored it, but then the knocking moved to the rear of the trailer. Summoning her courage, she grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The fog swallowed her surroundings, and the cold cut through her layers. As she circled the truck, she found footprints leading away from the cab and disappearing into the fog. Then she heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all directions. Sarah climbed back into the truck and locked the doors. She managed to restart the engine and drove blindly, pushing through the fog until she broke free into clear air. She didn't stop until she reached the next checkpoint. When she told her story to the locals, they exchanged uneasy glances. One of them pulled out an old newspaper article about a trucker who had vanished on the Lost Mile years ago. His description matched the man Sarah had picked up. The locals told her that drivers sometimes see him, but those who stop are never seen again. Sarah quit ice road trucking after that trip, but the experience haunts her to this day. She often wonders, if she hadn't driven through the fog fast enough, would she have joined the other lost souls of the ice road?